On September 10th, 2001, the world was one way. On September 11th, 2001, the world was forever changed. But in that tiny, suffocating sliver of time, one day before the war on terror exploded, one man delivered a warning that should have shaken the foundation of the American government. But it was immediately buried, forgotten, and replaced by the single greatest cover story in modern history. That man was Donald H. Rumsfeld, then Secretary of Defense. He stood before the Pentagon, a building that would be struck less than 24 hours later, and he declared a war of a different kind. He said the enemy was not some distant foreign terrorist cell. He said the enemy was closer to home. It was the Pentagon bureaucracy itself. And then he dropped the bomb. He said, and I quote, "According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. $2.3 trillion, not over a decade, not over a century. This was the number that, according to the Pentagon's own estimates, they simply could not trace. They could not reconcile. It was a black hole in the nation's ledgers. It was a number that exceeded the net value of all the manufacturing plant and equipment in the entire United States. It was $8,000 for every single man, woman, and child in America." Rumsfeld was not talking about a rounding error. He wasn't talking about misplaced receipts for office supplies. He was talking about a failure of financial controls so catastrophic, so breathtaking in its scale, that it would have instantly bankrupted and incarcerated the entire executive leadership of any private company on the planet. But this wasn't a private company. This was the Department of Defense, the single largest, most complex, most powerful organization in the history of the world, spending your tax dollars. The very next day, the world caught fire. The planes hit the towers and the Pentagon. The war on terror began. And just like that, the $2.3 trillion revelation, the largest financial crime hint in American history, vanished. It was wiped from the headlines, replaced by images of smoke and fear. And the entire world stopped asking, where did the money go? That, my friends, was no accident. That was the perfect distraction. The $2.3 trillion lie was instantly covered by the trillion-dollar wars that followed. The narrative they told you was simple. America is under attack. We must spend whatever it takes to keep you safe. No cost too great, no expense too high. And under the cover of that patriotic fervor, under the endless war spending, they made sure that the original monstrous accounting gap was never, ever closed. In fact, they made sure it got worse. The lie of incompetence. What is the official story? The Pentagon, the largest bureaucracy on Earth, claims they are simply too big, too old, and too complicated to keep track of their own money. They tell you it's a problem of outdated systems. They tell you they're using financial software from the 1970s. They tell you they have over 2,000 disconnected, incompatible accounting systems, one for the Army, one for the Navy, one for 1,000 different agencies, and they just can't talk to each other. It's an image of bumbling, well-meaning incompetence. They're trying their best, bless their hearts, but the job is just too complex. The systems are too old. It's an easy, digestible excuse that lets everyone off the hook. But let's pause and apply the same brutal logic we used to dissect the 2008 bailout. If the Department of Defense can design and deploy a stealth bomber that evades radar, a marvel of aerospace engineering, if they can manage the logistics of moving 100,000 troops, 10,000 vehicles, and millions of gallons of fuel across a hostile ocean in a matter of weeks, if they can coordinate a global network of satellites, drones, and intelligence assets in real time to hunt a single individual in a cave on the other side of the planet, are you truly supposed to believe they can buy a standard accounting software package that runs a medium-sized brewery? No, the failure is not a bug. It is a feature. The Department of Defense has been required by law to pass a full financial audit since 1990. Then again, since 1996. They have failed every single time. In recent years, they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars just on the audits, only to fail them. They don't fail by getting a bad grade. They get a disclaimer of opinion, which is accounting speak for, your books are so messed up, we can't even tell you how messed up they are. They aren't losing money because they're bad at paperwork. They are losing money because the system is designed to be unauditable. The opacity is the point. It is the perfect mechanism for the largest transfer of public wealth in human history, hidden in plain sight. The accounting plugs and the $35 trillion lie. The deeper you dig, the more infuriating the reality becomes. It's not just that they can't balance their books, it's how they pretend to balance their books. To make their ledgers match the U.S. Treasury's numbers, the Pentagon employs a practice known as plugs. These are unsubstantiated, arbitrary accounting adjustments, essentially numbers pulled out of thin air, that auditors must rely on to bridge the gigantic gaps between what the Pentagon claims it spent and what the Treasury knows was paid out. Whistleblowers have repeatedly documented this practice, describing a system where officials simply insert these plugs to make the numbers line up, often in the dead of night, knowing full well the transaction is completely unsupported by documentation, and the size of these plugs is staggering. In one infamous report on the fiscal year 2000 books, the year before Rumsfeld's announcement, the Pentagon processed a total of $4.4 trillion in department-level accounting entries. Of that, auditors noted that $1.1 trillion were unsupported or improper. But the numbers only grew exponentially under the cover of the War on Terror. In recent audits, the total amount of undocumented accounting adjustments used by the Pentagon to compile their reports was a mind-boggling $35 trillion over a single year. Think about that figure. $35 trillion. That's more than the GDP of the United States. It's a number that defies comprehension. It's a mountain of unsupported, fictional data created by military accountants just to make the books look like they exist. It's a confession that the financial reality of the U.S. defense apparatus is a complete fabrication. The lie is not that they can't do their job. The lie is that they won't, and that this deliberate chaos serves a higher, darker purpose. The black budget's cloak. This is where the $2.3 trillion hole stops being a story about bureaucratic incompetence and starts being a story about power and concealment. This is where the black budget comes in. The black budget is the funding stream for classified military and intelligence operations, the super-secret stuff that, for obvious reasons of national security, cannot be publicly disclosed. This is the realm of spy satellites, advanced reconnaissance aircraft, and intelligence networks. It's hidden, it's protected. And that protection is necessary, right? But what if the massive systemic failure to audit the regular budget is a cloaking device for a black budget that is exponentially larger than the official one? The official, publicly disclosed black budget for intelligence programs is typically in the tens of billions of dollars. But if the Pentagon can account for literally trillions of dollars in general transactions, if they have a $2.3 trillion gap right before 9/11 and trillions in unsupported adjustments afterward, that creates a slush fund so vast it could finance entire secret wars. The War on Terror was the single greatest excuse in American history to classify spending, to bypass oversight, and to move gigantic sums of money away from public scrutiny. When the government needed to fund a massive clandestine surveillance program, when they needed to rapidly develop a new drone fleet without a single congressional hearing, when they needed to funnel cash to a foreign proxy force through a shell company, did they go through the slow, painful process of getting that money properly authorized and accounted for? No. They simply funneled it through the black hole of the Pentagon's unauditable accounting system. They hid it in the $2.3 trillion gap that existed before the War on Terror, and the $35 trillion in plugs that came after. The incompetence is a convenient mask. It allows them to tell the public, oops, we lost a few billion, when the reality is they have intentionally created a parallel, covert financial state that operates outside the rule of law and democratic accountability. And that is the truth that was instantly buried by the smoke of September 11th. The moment Rumsfeld confessed to the crime, the perpetrators were handed the perfect, decade-spanning get-out-of-jail-free card, the War on Terror. And the ultimate winners of this arrangement weren't the troops, weren't the intelligence officers, and weren't the American people. The ultimate winners were the defense contractors. The War on Terror was not just a conflict, it was an industry that fed on the blood and treasure of the American people and which found its greatest nourishment in the very financial black hole we've been discussing. If the Department of Defense is losing track of trillions, where do those dollars actually go? They don't just evaporate. They flow straight into the pockets of the military-industrial complex, MIC, the colossal network of defense contractors, lobbyists, and former Pentagon officials who treat war as a guaranteed profit model. The War on Terror was the most profitable financial bonanza in the history of this complex. Since 9/11, the total Pentagon spending has topped over $14 trillion, and of that staggering sum, 1/3 to 1/2 went directly to corporate defense contractors. This is the largest wealth transfer from the American taxpayer to private corporations in the last 2 decades. We are talking about trillions of dollars in contracts flowing to just a handful of companies: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman. These 5 giants alone split over $2.1 trillion in Pentagon contracts in the first 2 decades post 9/11. Now, let's connect the dots between the Pentagon's unauditable books and the contractors' obscene profits. This is where the corruption becomes a systemic policy, a system of engineered waste. Contractors don't just overcharge. They are incentivized to create maximum waste and confusion. They thrive in the chaos of an unauditable system. How does it work? The markup game. When the Pentagon buys a spare part, there is zero market pressure on the contractor to offer a reasonable price, because the Pentagon's accounting is too messy to catch the fraud. Whistleblowers have detailed cases of 8,000% markups on simple items. A $10 commercial part is billed to the taxpayer at $800. An Air Force official once testified about being charged $10,000 for a simple toilet seat and $640 for a light bulb. The Pentagon paid it, and the disorganized, too complex accounting system ensured that this waste was simply swept under the trillion-dollar rug. The overstocking scandal. Auditors have repeatedly found that the military overpurchases equipment it does not need, because it literally does not know what it already has. Imagine a multi-billion-dollar corporation that keeps buying inventory even though it has 14 years of stockpiles already sitting in warehouses. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, they all overshot their spare parts needs by hundreds of millions of dollars in a single year because they cannot track their own inventory. Why does this happen? Because every new purchase is a guaranteed multi-million-dollar contract for the MIC, the contractor-controlled assets. Here's the most insidious part. The Pentagon cannot even account for a massive portion of its own assets, around 63% of its nearly $4 trillion in total assets. Why? Because much of that inventory and equipment is in the possession of private contractors, and the Pentagon's accounting systems are too broken to track it. Contractors literally hold billions of dollars of taxpayer-owned property. In a stunning display of arrogance, one major contractor threatened to charge the Pentagon 450,000 labor hours to simply provide a report on the F-35 parts the government owns that the company is storing. The Pentagon, unable to compel compliance, capitulated. The fox is not just guarding the hen house. The fox owns the keys to the barn and charges the farmer rent. This is not a failure of inventory management. This is the deliberate engineering of a financial system where accountability is impossible, ensuring a perpetual flow of guaranteed profits from your wallet to their balance sheets. The revolving door. Corruption as a career path. How was this system allowed to survive decades of audit failures and public outrage? The answer is the revolving door, the incestuous relationship between the Pentagon, Congress, and the defense contractors. It is a proven career-boosting path. 1. Work at the Pentagon as a top general, admiral, or procurement official. 1. Retire, resign, and immediately take a multi-million-dollar job as a lobbyist, consultant, or executive for the same defense contractors you were just tasked with regulating and overseeing. This ensures that the officials making the decisions today, the people in charge of the failed audits and the unaccountable spending, are already securing their lucrative future. They have a massive financial incentive to maintain the chaos and guarantee the contracts. They are not working for the American people. They are working on their resume and retirement fund. The lobbyists for these major contractors outnumber members of Congress. They pour millions into campaign contributions and think tanks, ensuring that the political environment is always set to one temperature, more spending. They don't have to convince Congress to go to war. They just have to convince Congress that the only solution to every problem, foreign or domestic, is more military spending. The victims and the immunity. The war on terror was not only a financial windfall for the contractors, it was a shield of immunity for the criminals. In the wake of 9/11, the Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan concluded that $31 billion to $60 billion in taxpayer money spent on the wars was lost to fraud, waste, and abuse. This is the official conservative number. Yet, just like the 2008 financial crisis, the total number of high-level prosecutions for this massive, systemic, multi-billion-dollar fraud is essentially zero. The corruption is tolerated. The waste is budgeted. The overruns are routine. They are too big to audit, too complicated to change, and too connected to jail. The narrative is always the same: national security. We can't change the system right now. The country is at risk. We can't prosecute this defense executive. It might destabilize the defense industry. The threat of terror became the ultimate financial and legal shield for the entire military-industrial complex. And who paid the real price? The taxpayer who funded the $2.3 trillion black hole saw their national debt skyrocket and got nothing but rising inflation and a crumbling infrastructure. The troops who were sent into battle with equipment that was overpriced, sometimes faulty, and often poorly accounted for. The whistleblowers who tried to speak out, like the one military accountant who risked his career to find out what happened to a mere $300 million and was silenced by the bureaucracy. The $2.3 trillion that Rumsfeld admitted was missing on the eve of 9/11 was not lost. It was allocated without accountability. It was a covert financial pipeline established to fund the shadow government and enrich the connected elite. The war on terror didn't create the black hole. It provided the smokescreen to ensure that the black hole would never, ever be audited. And the system continues. The Pentagon has failed its audit every single year since 2018. They still cannot account for trillions in assets. They are still using financial plugs. The lesson Wall Street learned in 2008 was that the government will bail them out. The lesson the military-industrial complex learned on September 11, 2001, was that the government will simply stop counting. They replaced accountability with secrecy. They replaced transparency with national security. And they have been taking your money ever since. The $2.3 trillion was the original sin. The trillions that followed were the unaccountable engineered profit of a self-perpetuating war machine. And until the American people demand a genuine, uncompromised, and penalized audit of the Pentagon, this financial crime against the nation will continue to happen. They did it for 20 years. They'll do it again.